Hi, everybody. I can see people starting to come in. That's great. Good morning. Nice to see you. Not that I can really see you, but you know what I mean. Lovely to have you with us. I'm just going to give it a minute or so so that everybody's here, and then we'll get started. Okay, hope you're all well and hope you've all managed to grab a cup of tea or something. We're with you for the next hour, hour and a half. And the topic today, as you know, is transitions planning that works. So as most of you will know, I'm Tracy Francis and I work for ARC Scotland, and we manage the Scottish Transitions Forum. And we work with professionals, young people and parents and carers to improve transitions for all young people with additional support needs of all kinds, particularly through the transition to adulthood. And my own particular interest is working with parents and carers. And we do that in a number of ways. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that later on. But one of them is to run online webinars and events like this to try and bring people together and to try and share information that parents and carers really need to know. So I've got with us today, we're joined by Andrew Wright, who's from the Salverson Mindroom Centre. You may or may not have heard of them before. They work across Scotland and they offer individualised support to one-to-one support to families who are living with learning difficulties. So Andrew, can I just ask you to introduce yourself and say a little bit more about how Mindroom works?
Yes, certainly. So as Tracy said, I'm Andrew Wright. I work for the Salverson Mindroom Centre. We, like ARC and like the Scottish Transitions Forum, work with young people, with parents, carers and with professionals. The bulk of our work is in offering direct help and support to all of those who are affected by learning difficulties. And our expertise really is in what is currently called neurodivergent conditions. So we're talking about conditions like autism spectrum, dyslexia, DCD or dyspraxia, and the likes. And my particular remit with Salverson Mindroom Centre is in supporting young people directly to think about their transition from high school, hence my place here today.
Thanks, Andrew. So I'm going to run through the housekeeping. If you've attended one of these webinars before, you'll know how it works. We're all pretty familiar with this these days now. I'm sorry that your cameras and your microphones are disabled, but that's because we're recording these sessions and we share them with other organisations and with parents and carers afterwards. So we want to protect everyone's privacy, and that's why we do that. So, but you're still very welcome to be involved, to make comments, to share, ask your questions, share any views or any thoughts that you might have based on your experience. If you want to do that, you can do that at any point during the session. If you look on your screen, look for either the Q&A icon or the small question mark, and if you click on that, that should take you to a box where you can key in your question. And I'll be looking at the questions as they come in, and I'll either answer them or I'll pass them on to Andrew, or we'll discuss them together and try and come up with an answer for you. And we'll get through as many of those as we can during the session. You should also have a button somewhere on your screen that's labelled handouts, and you'll find all the slides from today's presentations there, plus another couple of handouts that Andrew's added as background to what he's going to be talking about. So by all means, you can download those as we go, or if you don't want to do that, if you prefer, they'll be on our website, the Scottish Transitions Forum website, after the session. They'll be there from tomorrow, along with the recording. So I think that's probably all for the housekeeping just now. Let's get going. Normally I hand over to my co-presenter at this point and I let them talk to you, but today you're going to hear from me a little bit more. I hope that's okay. We're going to combine this because I'm going to kick us off by talking a little bit about the context around transitions planning, looking at how it's supposed to work, what the law says around it, and who's responsible for what. And I know that we've probably got, from the list of people that I know who'd signed up for this webinar, some of you, I know we're at different points in that process. Some people have got young people who are still in school. Some people, the young people are either homeschooling or they're not in school just now, or they've already left and they've moved on to the next things. So what I'm going to try and do is, over the course of this session, give you tips and principles and ideas and thoughts and information that's going to support you wherever on that process your young person is. Okay, so unfortunately, we do know that what happens in practice doesn't match up with the theory very often. So some of the things I'm going to be talking about are things that we should be seeing, and we know that in practice we're not. But it's still useful, I think, for you to be aware of those and to know what what it's reasonable for you to ask for when you're having those conversations with service providers and people who are working with your young person. So I'll do that first. Then I'm going to hand over to Andrew. Andrew's going to talk about person-centered planning, putting your young person right at the heart of the transition process and making sure that their views are understood, they're captured, they're shared with the people who need to hear them. And he's also going to talk about a new resource that he's been involved in developing that you'll be able to use or recommend to other people to help them get those views from your young person. And then after that, I'm just quickly going to run through some resources that you might find useful as part of putting together your own plan. So let me just start by sharing my screen here, if you can just bear with me a moment. Right, there we go. And hopefully you can see this. There, so you should be seeing a screen that says Transitions to Adult Life, Tools, Tips and Supports to help you and your child navigate the journey. So I'm going to start off just by saying, what do we mean about transition? Because I have had sessions where parents have said, there's so much jargon around this process. What exactly do we mean by transition? It's very simple. Transition simply means change. And all kinds of changes happen as we go through life. There's small ones that are day to day. There's larger ones like moving house, changing schools. And then there's some of the really bigger ones. And the transition to adulthood is a particularly challenging one. So you don't need to have additional support needs to understand why, looking back on your teenage years, you might be doing that with a bit of a shudder. If you're like me, you're going, actually, I really don't want to relive that time again. So let's just have a quick look at some of the things that are going on during that period and why that transition into adulthood is such a major one. I think first and foremost, looking at what's happening to your young person, you've got the growing up process taking place. You've got the physical changes, you've got the emotional changes, all the hormones going on, and all of that's happening for young people with additional support needs, just as it is for the rest of us at that stage in our lives. And that comes with its own challenges, and they are aware of change as well. If your young person doesn't cope with change particularly, then that's one of the things that they will be finding very unsettling as well. Greater autonomy, this is this is the stage in life when people are asking you to take more responsibility for what you want to do. They're asking you to think about what's coming in the future. Oh, wait a second, that's stuck there. Thinking about what's coming in the future, taking responsibility for moving yourself from one place to another, for interacting with people, for keeping track of your own time, track of your own homework, for example, that kind of thing. And if you're somebody who's really challenged in that respect, then that's something that's quite difficult to cope with too, obviously. New routines. The movement into adulthood is going to bring new routines, new challenges, new changes, and it's going to be a different way of working for a lot of people. The support structures are going to change. What happens in adult services is very different, or can be very different, from the way that children's services are set up, particularly in health, but it applies to social care and education as well. So the roles can change, the function that people have within the process can change too. And there's a lot of adjustment to take place over that. And then family changes. There may be that there are siblings who are moving away from home. There may be parents who are returning to work or actually stopping work. There could be all sorts of things going on. And so it's not surprising when you look at that, that you can understand why families very often say, it's actually our transition too. It's not just my young person's. We're all going through this together. So what does the law say should happen to support transitions and to support a smooth process. It's actually summed up in this document, the 7 Principles of Good Transitions, which is something that ARC Scotland published about 10 years ago, and we update it regularly. It's in its 3rd edition at the moment, and the 4th revision is going to be launched next year. And what the Principles of Good Transitions do is it makes it easy for everyone to see what organisations should be doing to support young people and make it easier for them to have a good experience of leaving school and moving on to the next steps. And there are lots of Scottish laws and government guidelines that include things that are relevant to this particular stage of someone's life. And these principles are not actually laws, but what they do is take all of those little bits and pieces across a whole range of laws and guidelines and bring them together into one place that's easy to see and easy to understand. So if an organisation is following all the principles, it's doing what the law requires and it's meeting its statutory duties. And the principles are endorsed by the Scottish Government. Most of Scotland's local authorities endorse them, and the support agencies and structures across Scotland that have agreed that this is the way that we should be working to meet those obligations. So you can see them there. I don't need to read them out to you. Well, actually, I'll just skip through them very quickly. Planning and decision making should be carried out in a person-centered way. It should be about your young person at the centre, and that's one of the main things we'll be talking about this morning. Support should be coordinated. You should expect that to be coordinated across all services. The planning should start early, and it really, according to the legislation, it should start at least a year before the school leaving date. But actually our recommendation is that people start thinking about it at least 2 years before, to get the information they need and to find out what sorts of options there will be for their young person, so that at the time you start that planning process, you've already done some work towards understanding what kinds of things might be available. All young people should get the support they need, they're Principle 4, and young people, parents and carers must have access to the information they need. There is a statutory duty on local authorities to make sure that parents actually are advised and have information about services in their area. As I say, theory and practice, we know that a lot of local authorities maybe don't sort of completely step up to their duties in the way that perhaps they should. But in the law, they are required to make sure that parents and carers and young people have information. Families and carers need support. It's recognising that the family is a huge part of this section of a young person's life and actually making that transition. And a continued focus on transitions across Scotland, recognising that they're important and recognising that it's something that we need to keep working towards because it's such a significant part of people's lives. So whose job is it? I'm going to pop through this very quickly. If your young person is still in school, education will start the planning process, and that should happen, as I say, at least a year before according to law, but we recommend 2 years before to start those conversations going with parents. Education should be responsible for arranging planning meetings if your young person is in school, and they should take place during that period of time coming up to the school leaving date. And they should ensure information is available to relevant agencies 6 months before the leaving date. So if your young person has got a leaving date that's agreed, and you know some of the support people who are going to be taking that forward in college, for example, or whatever, the information about your young person should be with them 6 months before, so that they have the time to put that structure into place to be able to make that seamless. And they also have an obligation to gather information, relevant information from other agencies, to make sure that that can be shared with your consent. Social services, their role in the process is really, you can see that sort of 4th point down there, assess support needs and the carers assessment. Their role is really to look at what kind of support your young person might need, look at the personal outcomes that they're thinking about doing, what they're thinking about doing with their lives and how they want that to look, and start talking about budgets and how that might be paid for. We know that under current circumstances, a lot of social services, a lot of local authorities are dragging their heels on budgets, and that's a big problem at the moment. And then health. They have a duty to share information with your consent and with the consent of your young person. and they should attend transition meetings when they're invited. And they should also provide advice and information about accessing adult services, because as I said, with health, sometimes the practitioners who might support someone in children's healthcare will be very different from the practitioners who will be supporting them in adult healthcare. And identifying who the right person is to speak to and who that should be passed on to is something that health professionals at this transition stage should be able to help with. If your young person is out of school or is being homeschooled, then a lot of these duties will still apply, although they won't take place through school. Education will still have a duty to try and help you with information, but they won't organise planning meetings for you. That's something that you will have to coordinate yourself if your young person is not within school at the moment. But you can approach social services yourself as a parent. If your young person has not had their support needs assessed as part of that discussion around what their future support might look like, you can pick up the phone yourself as a parent to social services and say, I have a concern about this young person. We think that support is going to be needed going forward, and we would like to request an assessment of support needs to take place. It's also a very good idea to have a carer's assessment to look at your needs as well, and how supporting your young person is affecting your well-being and the well-being of the rest of the family, and how that's likely to impact going forward too, because that really needs to be on the radar. People need to be aware of the impact that's having. The family's role: know your rights, ask for services, and prepare to participate. You have the absolute right as a family to be fully involved in all of this process and to have your views heard. It doesn't necessarily mean automatically that what the family feels is appropriate is necessarily going to be what services can provide, but you do have the right to be involved in that process. So taking part in meetings, that can be flexible. If you're not able to be physically present at a meeting, or if you struggle to be part of that process, you're entitled to take somebody else along with you, or to give your views in writing or in any other form. Could be by picture, could be by video, could be by an audio recording. Anything that gets your views and your young person's views represented in those transition planning meetings, you're allowed to do under the system. That's absolutely fine. That's your prerogative. Asking for services, ask questions. If you've heard of a service that you think meets your needs and it's not being talked about, then bring it up. Ask why that might be the case. Do your own exploration and prepare to participate. Make sure that you've got some sense of where you want this to go, what you want your goals to be in conjunction with your young person. And Andrew's going to be, what Andrew has to say is going to be talking about that as well in a little while. So planning a life that works, this is the sort of thing that makes up life, and that all of these things are going to have to be looked at and taken into account at some point during the process. But what I would say is this is not intended in any way to freak people out, because none of these things have to take place in a particular order or in a particular time. As a family, you're in control of this process, and you can tackle these at the time that's right for you. They are all going to have to be covered as your young person moves through into adulthood, but it's up to you when the time is right to do that. The one thing that I would say is around that one at the bottom, decision making and safeguarding, and that's around guardianship and power of attorney. And that's something it's a good idea to have explored and got in place by the time your young person is 16. We have a webinar on that. We did one in the last session of webinars, and that's on our website at the moment. If you didn't make that webinar, you can download that and have a listen, and that will tell you about the process and how to do it. And the reason for putting a timescale on that is because according to Scottish law, young people reach adulthood at the age of 16. In England it's 18, but in Scotland it's 16, and at that point you won't as a parent automatically have the right to be able to be involved with decisions around their healthcare or financial management or anything like that, unless you've actually got the powers granted legally. However, having said that, if you haven't managed to get that in place by the age of 16, it's not the end of the world, that you've not missed the boat. You can start that process happening at any time. but I'm just flagging that up because it's probably one of the most important ones for you to be aware of, that it would be worth following up, perhaps at the top of your priority list. So just a picture of transitions. We can think of it as a Rubik's Cube. There's so much involved. Every time you move one part of the puzzle, something else seems to shift as well. What we're aiming to do is get all those faces of the Rubik's Cube lined up, all those colours lined up into one place, and then we've solved the puzzle. We've actually reached the point where transition can be said to have happened in the way that the young person wanted and that the family wanted. So it's quite good if you think visually, it's quite good to have that in your head as something that we're working towards. And then the last thing before I hand over to Andrew, I just want to say a wee bit about transitions in the time of COVID, because obviously this is one big thing that's getting in the way at the moment. We can all share stories about services that are not working in the way that we'd like them to. But one big thing that's getting in the moment is COVID, and services have had to change how they function. So employment's become more challenging for all of us. You don't need me to tell you about that. Education's having to change the way it's delivered, and it's also had an impact on social services. But something to be aware of is the fact that the legal framework around transitions has not actually been affected by COVID at all. Those duties are still in place. The requirements and the obligations on organisations to support young people haven't changed. So if you're finding that supports and services are coming up with some excuses and blaming COVID, they still have a duty to you and to your young person to support that process in the same way, or as close a way as they can to the way that that was supported previously. So it's worth being aware that not as much has changed around that as you might expect. And the good news is that lots of agencies are still up and running, including some of the resources I'm going to be talking about a wee bit later on. They might be working in a different way. It might be by Zoom, it might be by phone line, but the advice is still there, and there's still options for study and for work experience and for skills development. If you were at last week's webinar when Pauline was talking about Skills Development Scotland, you'll know they're still running their advice service just as they were before. And support is beginning to catch up. There's lots of research being done, and there's a real appetite to make sure that young disabled people aren't left behind even further. So although it's not perfect under current circumstances, just don't fall into the trap of thinking that there's nothing out there at all, because there is. Right, I'm just going to end this. I'm now going to hand over to Andrew, because we're going to go on to talk about, I'd mentioned getting your young person's views front and centre in this process. And Andrew's going to be talking a little bit about how that works. And as I say, a new resource that he's been involved in developing that should help with that, and will help you have some of those conversations if it's a little bit difficult to get started. So Andrew, I'm just making you the presenter just now. Have you got that?
I have indeed, thank you.
Okay, then it's over to you.
Here we are. I click the right buttons, I'll be able to share the correct screen here. Super. Hopefully I'm now sharing my screen.
You are, and we've got a message from Jenny appearing on there as well.
Yeah. Right, let me, yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? I should have put down all the other things that were running in the background. Not entirely sure how to do that. Anyway, let's hope nothing inappropriate pops up in the course of the conversation. So thank you for inviting me to be a part of this today. It's really good to come and share some of my experience with you. It's very good to be here. My job title, as you can see there at Salvesen Mind Room Centre, is Children and Young People Outreach Specialist, which sounds very grand. What it basically means is I'm one of the team that actually works direct with young people. So to give you just a very quick background into my background experience, I suppose. I spent 16 years as a classroom teacher in England, in the primary sector, and I had some management experience as well, primarily really in behaviour management and in personal and social education. Also some experience in preschool education, voluntary youth work. I've worked as well in staffing, in hospitality, and in administration. I have twin adult sons. We adopted them when they were just over 2 years old, and they both, at a very young age, were identified as dyspraxic and dyslexic, but one in particular went on to also get an ASD diagnosis. And for him, his condition, for want of a better word, does continue to impact on his life. His brother developed strategies so that it didn't have the same impact. I joined Salveson Mindroom Centre a couple of years ago in 2018 to lead on a project that was organising supported work placements for young people with learning difficulties who were unlikely to otherwise get that experience. Then came the pandemic, and like many people, I was furloughed, but came back to work in July to broaden my remit. And my focus now is on what we're calling transitions advocacy. And in a way, that's really about self-advocacy. So it's about me working with young people to help them identify their strengths, their interests, what they would like to do for the future, and then to share those views with people who are involved in planning their futures, which is just what Tracy was talking about. So the Salveson Mindroom Centre, to just give you a little bit of background there, was established in 2000, so we're about to have our 21st birthday. We have 3 basic objectives. We want all children and young people with learning difficulties to lead a fulfilling life. And so one of the things we do is we support them and their families to achieve that. We've got a multidisciplinary team, and by that I mean people from all different backgrounds. So I come from the world of education. There's social workers on the team, lawyers, people from health, all sorts of backgrounds. So a wealth of experience and knowledge that can be used to inform families and professionals about the way things could be going if they're not going as well as they might. And then finally, and probably most importantly, our goal is to empower children and young people and their families with the skills and the confidence to have a real say in decisions about their lives. And that's very much going to be my focus in what I talk about this morning. Tracy gave this webinar the title Transition Planning That Works. So it seems like a pretty tall order to me to talk about that, but I'm going to do my best and share from my own experience and my background with you. I'll break it down into 5 simple questions, and we'll just spend a little bit of time on each one. So first of all, what do we mean by transition planning that works? What is a successful transition plan? Why is that important? Who should do it? And Tracy's touched on that a little already. Where to begin and how is a big question, and when should it be done? So 5 questions that we'll look at briefly. We're going to start with the first one, which is, what is it? And if you've been to a webinar in the last 2 or 3 months, you may well be familiar already with Mentimeter. This is a way of you being able to participate in what we're doing this morning. So if you've got a mobile phone, a smartphone, or you can use just a web browser, what I'd like you to do, if you're willing, is to simply go to menti.com. And menti.com will then ask you to input a 7-digit code, which will allow you to participate in the first part of what I'm going to say today. And that code, hopefully you can see there, is 1288853. That's 1288853. And to start off with, just a simple question, which is transitions that work. Well, that's not a question, is it? It's a statement. Transitions that work are. So I'd like you to just share any words at all that you would associate with a successful transition. It might be a word that relates to the final outcome of a transition. It could be about the process itself. It could be both. And you can submit as many words or as many thoughts as you wish. So we have first word appearing on the screen there, fluid, which is a very interesting one, perhaps a variant on the idea of it being flexible and very much geared to the needs of the young person concerned. I would agree with that most definitely. Now we have more words appearing as if by magic. So led by the young person most definitely. A smooth transition would be definitely the ideal, wouldn't it? And partnerships, yeah, partnership is very important. And an element of what I'll be talking about actually is working with other people and having all the people that are involved collaborating and cooperating with one another. The idea there that goals might be involved, and young people who are in that transition phase, setting goals is certainly an important part of the process. Fulfillment, a good word there. I think we would all hope that wherever life takes us, it's going to lead to a fulfilled experience, a fulfilled and a happy life, isn't it? Holistic, again, very important. And something you look forward to. These are wonderful words and phrases that are coming up. Yeah, picking up there on the fact that this really should be an enjoyable and a positive experience. So moving from high school into adult life is something that should excite young people. It should excite us as parents to see our young people moving into that stage of their lives. There may be things that we're concerned about, but overall, we're hoping for a smooth, a holistic, a successful process that is led by the young person and that leads to them being happy and fulfilled. So thank you very much for those words. I will share that Wordle, I think they call it, don't they? Whatever, a word cloud with Tracy after the presentation. So we'll move on. I think to summarize, there are three things that I would want to say define a good transition planning process. First of all, it's coordinated, and that's one of the things that was picked up there. And so all the different agencies that are involved in this process are going to be speaking with one another and working together towards the same goal. It'll be comprehensive, so it's going to cover everything that impacts on the life of the young person. So this is not just education and work, and Tracy's already touched on that. And then finally, child-centered. Now for child, you can read young person or simply person-centered, but the hopes and dreams of the person who is making the transition should be central to the plan. And I'm going to refer to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, but they, although they say child, do relate to young people as well. So the second question was why? Why is this important at all? And why is it important that the process is centered on the young person? Well, in some ways, that seems like a bit of a non-question, doesn't it? If you're interested in knowing a little bit more about the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, you'll find that at the Children and Young Persons Commissioner for Scotland website, and I've put the address there. But key to what we're talking about is Article 12 of the Convention. And you may be aware that this convention, abbreviated to UNCRC more often than not, is going through the process of being adopted into Scottish law, actually. So these are significant rights that children have, and it won't be long before they become legal rights. Article 12 is about being listened to and taken seriously. Children, you'll be surprised to hear, are human beings. Might not feel like it sometimes, but basically human rights do apply to children and young people just the same as they do to adults. They have the human right to have their opinions, and for those opinions to be heard, not just heard though, to be taken seriously. And that is with their evolving capacities taken into account. Now, capacities is a term that gets used a lot in this context. So I thought it would be worth just outlining what we mean by a child's capacity. It basically is their ability to make a reasoned decision, and whether or not they actually have the wherewithal, for want of a better phrase, to do that. So their increasing ability to make reasoned decisions in different parts of their lives. And it's important that child's views are taken seriously whenever they're heard, because it can have a really significant impact on what the adults who are involved in their lives consider to be in their best interests. And it gives those adults a better idea of what's important to the child, and also what they might consider distressing. So to just finish summarising this article of the UNCRC, children and young people, as Tracy's already touched on, just like adults and families, have a right to be given the information they need to make good decisions. So it's not okay to just say, oh, they wouldn't understand that, I'm not going to tell them. Or they might choose the wrong thing, I'm not going to tell them. They have a right to all the information they need to make good decisions. They should always feel that they're able to express their opinions, and they should know that they have that right, and adults need to know about that right as well, so that they don't dismiss it out of hand. Is that relevant, you might be asking yourself, to my young person? It's all right for other people, but really I'm not sure if this applies to me. Is it that important? Well, the answer is yes. Straightforward. Basically, if we're concerned about well-being and the happiness of our young people, then we're concerned about their rights. An example, we all have a right to be protected from being hurt, or from being badly treated. Now, if that right was not respected, then our well-being, our happiness would be obviously well and truly affected. The right to be listened to and to be taken seriously is no different. So who should be involved in this? Who gets to kind of work out what the young person actually wants, and how do we get their voice into the picture so that the plan that's made for them and about them is made with them rather than for them? One option is to engage professionals to do that for you. And person-centered planning is a way of doing that. In this context, we're talking not just about a general concept of asking the young person what they want, but a very specific methodology that was developed in the 1990s by a group of psychologists based in the States. It brings together all of those who are involved in a transition for a shared discussion a shared session that focuses on what the young person's plan should contain. It places the young person at the centre, and then it secures agreement from all the agencies who are involved on who's going to do what and when they're going to do it. As in the picture here, it uses graphic facilitation, which is a way of kind of collating the plan. And then that huge, it's done kind of on a very large piece of paper on the wall, usually. That's given to the young person at the end of the planning session. There are a couple of different methodologies that they use. They're known as maps and path. So a very quick outline of those. Maps is the simpler one. It begins with listening to a person's dreams. It acknowledges their nightmares, the things they want to avoid, and it builds a really rich portrait of what they have to offer, their gifts and their talents, and then focuses on simple daily actions that are going to move them in constructive directions towards that dream. Path, which is more commonly used in this context, I would say, starts in the future with what that dream is, what the ideal future is, and then it works backwards to an outcome of identifying those first steps that are going to be possible and also positive, and positivity is really important in this. PATH stands for Planning Alternative Tomorrows with Hope. So bringing out there the fact that it really is important that it's a positive process. It's a similar process to MAPS, but perhaps a bit more detailed. Now, Tracy will give details, I think they may be included in one of the handouts, of people in Scotland who are trained in this methodology, person-centered planning. So that is something that you can explore. There are costs involved, but there are also avenues you can go down to meet those costs. So more about that in the handouts. But these professionals are... Super, thank you. These professionals aren't the only people, however, who can make sure the voice of your young person is central to their transition. For instance, it's what I do. I don't undertake transition planning myself, though, to be clear. What I do is work with young people to help them to formulate and share their ideas about their future. But then, of course, there are other people. There's another group of people who are ideally suited to this work, the people who already know the young person better than anyone, and that's you. Parents and carers have a really significant and an important role to play in helping young people determine for themselves what they would like for the future and helping to make sure that that voice is central to the process. So where do you begin with that? And how do you actually go about doing that? If you just sat down after tea one night and said to your young person, so what do you want to do in the future? You probably wouldn't get very far. The way you do this needs to be a little bit more measured, I would say. Well, before we answer the question in full, I'm going to take you on a journey back in time. And here we are in a primary school hall back in the 1980s. This was a familiar sight during primary school PE lessons when I first started teaching. Wouldn't be unusual at all to turn around and spot a small 7-year-old balancing precariously at the top of a set of equipment just like this. Question is, what do you think would be the most appropriate response in that situation? So there you are in a primary school hall, and there's little Joe, 7 years old, precariously balanced at the top of a piece of equipment like that. Let's see what you think. We'll turn back to Menti or Mentimeter and have a bit of a vote, see what we think will be the most appropriate response. You can vote for any two of the 4 suggestions that are there. So you might think if somebody was in that dangerous situation, you would shout, stop. You might just say to them, oh, be careful. You might do nothing at all. Or you might look at them and say, oh, well done. What do you think is the most appropriate response? You see, we've had one response come through there. Maybe some people are thinking, I've got no idea. Well, just have a guess. But one person's thinking they would look and say, well done. A couple of people now on thinking well done would be the most appropriate response. One would want to urge the young person to be careful. Just give a minute to kind of allow you to plump for one or the other. A couple more going for the be careful option, urging caution. It's interesting, isn't it? And in a way, is it a bit of a trick question? Well, yes and no, I suppose. The correct response, according to the training I was given, and it's something that has stayed with me ever since I did my teacher training, would have been either to say nothing at all or to say well done. Now, you might think, well, there's a child at the top of a large piece of equipment in a dangerous position. They need to be careful. Well, the theory is that child balancing precariously from the top of the gym equipment has got there by confidently pushing their limits. They've maybe even taken a few risks to do it. If you, as the trusted adult there, were to bellow stop or be careful, then potentially you could make them uncertain and anxious. And if they become uncertain or anxious, they become more likely to lose their footing and to actually have an accident. Rather than making them safer, which is what you were aiming to do, what you've actually done is to project your own fears and anxieties onto them. And in a way, you've brought about the disaster that you were trying to avoid. So difficult though it may have been, that's the attitude I've always adopted. And it's the attitude I adopted in that very scenario. In all my years, I have to say, fortunately, nobody ever did fall off the top of the PE equipment, despite the fact I may have been looking at them and my heart might have been beating like crazy, worrying about it. Well, the same principle, I would say, applies to the situations we're talking about today. When we're talking with young people about their hopes and their dreams for the future, it's really important that we make sure we don't project our own fears and our own anxieties about them failing or finding it difficult. We need instead to allow them to take those risks and to climb high. Now then, here's a very clear instruction for you. Don't think about bananas. What's the very first thing you did? Well, I would imagine you thought about a banana and then had to expend an awful lot of energy trying to get the idea of a banana out of your mind. What if, instead of saying, don't think about bananas, I'd said, think about apples? If I'd done that, you wouldn't have thought about bananas at all. So the way we phrase things and the type of language we use is really important. Positive language is always much more effective than negative language. And that's foundational to the approach that I and other people who work and support neurodivergent young people would take. introduce you now to something that's called islands of competence. It's a term introduced by another psychologist, Dr. Robert Brooks, some 20 years ago. He found patients he was seeing appeared, as he put it, to be drowning in an ocean of inadequacy. They felt really bad about themselves and like they had nothing to offer. Well, if there was an ocean of inadequacy, he concluded, there must be, within that ocean, islands of competence, areas that have been or have the potential to be sources of pride and accomplishment. Well, this is the approach that we really must take when we're discussing skills, abilities, hopes, and dreams with young people. Our focus always needs to be on what is possible and not on what the difficulties might be. So there's a short article about islands of competence written by Dr. Brooks, and Tracy has popped that in the handout notes if you'd like to know a little bit more about that concept and why it's so important. So just to bring out key points then from what we've looked at so far, it's important when we're working with our young people that we're positive. We focus on what can be done, not on the challenges. So we're focusing on those islands of competence. We're all uniquely gifted individuals, regardless of any challenges we face. We're going to focus on their strengths and think about how those strengths will help them to achieve their dream future. And we need to remember this is about what the young person wants for themselves. It's not about what we as parents and carers might want for them. So Tracy mentioned I was going to share some information about a new online resource that we at the Salvesen Mindroom Centre have developed. We've called it Future Me. It's effectively a digital workbook, so that's what we called it. And this is designed to support those who are helping young people think about what they want for the future as they go through that transition from high school into adult life. It's hosted on our website online. It has 12 sections comprising 40 different activities, and they cover a range of things that need to be considered when you're looking at transition planning. It's not itself, and it's important to point this out, it is not itself a transition planning tool. It's a set of activities that are designed to help a young person and their trusted adult think together about what the young person's strengths are and what they might then want for themselves in the future. It does also contain some activities designed to introduce the young person to things they might not have given a lot of thought to. So things that Tracy mentioned, such as legal aspects and powers of attorney, guardianship, that kind of thing. These activities in this guide provide a starting point for further discussion and exploration together. But like I say, it's not itself a planning tool. It is freely available on our website for anyone who'd like to use it. Based on work that I've developed in the last 2 years that I've been working with Salvesen Mindroom Centre. Well, we obviously don't have time to look over 40 different activities between now and 12 o'clock. So we're going to turn again to Menti, and where there's a list of the different sections, and you're going to need a new code for these next set of questions. On your screen, you will see that Menti tool tells you you've got to the end of the current presentation, and do you want to enter another code? Well, the answer is yes, you do, because we're going to vote now on which section we might like to have a bit of a look at. There are 12 in total, and the code that you need to give Menti now is 9135318. It's 9135318. And you will see then a list of 12 options. These are the 12 sections that we've divided the workbook into. Setting the scene, my world, my skills, my qualities, my career plan, my education and training, my independent living skills, legal matters, my money, my travel, moving on, and then a summary at the end. So if you'd like to kind of identify a couple of the sections that you think it would be interesting to have a look at, then we'll see how much time we've got, but I will certainly be able to show you a couple of the activities from the booklet. So we've got setting the scene, appearing, my world, the career plan section, and the legal matters section. Equally scored, so I might have to make an executive decision myself about which ones we go for. Career plan, not unsurprisingly, appearing highest at the moment and setting the scene. Well, I think what we'll do is we'll have a quick look at what's in the section on setting the scene and on some of the activities that are in the career plan. Career plan coming most highly at all there. Now, here we are. So when you access the resource, you will find it looks something like this. We click the start button. There's the introductory page that we saw an image of. Each of these section titles is clickable. So we'll click on setting the scene and go straight into this section. This is based on some of that work that we talked about in person-centered planning. So we're going to click the arrow, and it starts by asking the young person to identify milestones in their life's journey so far. So what have been the significant things in their life between them being born and where they are today? Just 5 places where they can kind of note those down. I should point out that there's perfectly acceptable for you or whoever's working with the young person to actually enter the information onto the screen here. It's not an English exercise, they don't need to do that themselves. So we start with their journey so far, then we put that behind us and move on to asking them what their dreams might be. The light bulb here giving a few tips about things that they might want to think about when they look at what the big dream is in the future. And if they say their dream is to be an astronaut, well, that's what goes in that box. If they want to be an astronaut, good on them. Important thing to move on to from that, though, is to recognize the things in the young person's life that they really might want to avoid. So you might think, oh, this young person would probably really enjoy just doing something simple like working in a supermarket. If you ask them their nightmares, you might find that actually that is like hell on earth so far as they're concerned. It's not what they would want to do at all. So really important to get that whole context, where their life has brought them so far, what their big dreams are for the future, and what they really would want to avoid in the future at all costs. And that is, in this resource, how we set the scene. The other thing that was mentioned there was a quick look at career planning. This is one of the bigger sections. So one of the things we ask young people to do to start off with is, in conversation with an adult they know, to use an online resource such as an online storyboarding tool, and there's a link there, to create a cartoon strip that illustrates a day in the life of somebody who has a job. This is to start them thinking about how a working life feels, basically, to put the job in the context of the whole day, from getting up in the morning to going to bed at night. We asked them to think about what their ideal workplace might be. And this is an activity where we're not talking about typing. We've got these wee icons that we can move around here as a way of identifying what their basic preferences are for the kind of environment they might want to work in, but space as well to see if there's anything else that they think would be important. What's their career goal? Right, we're starting to get more specific now. So they've thought about what their workplace might be like. They've talked about what somebody else's working day might be like. What would they want in their ideal, their perfect working day? We're not asking them to name a job yet, just say what kind of things would they like to be doing in their working day. And then we can move on to thinking about, right, what is their dream job? Now, I should point out, we've leapt right into the career planning part of this resource. We recommend that young people who are doing this would have already gone through the sections, identifying their skills, looking at their qualities as well. So for us, we're launching straight into this bit of the process. But you're getting an idea of the way the different activities here work. We're then going to be relating back some of those strengths and some of those qualities, thinking about how they might relate to that dream job. What other skills then might they need to acquire? So we're starting to move towards thinking about, okay, if that's your dream job, if that's where you want to go in the future, what are we going to have to start thinking about that's going to help you to get there?
Andrew?
Yeah.
I had a question saying the bit about the dream job. What do you do when your young person really has no idea? They can't create that storyboard because they don't actually know what to put in it. They haven't got anything to start with.
The storyboard would be based on a job that somebody they know has. So it might be a parent, it might be a carer, it might be a teacher, it might be a friend of the family, it might be an older brother or sister. So that's not about what they want their dream job to be. We've already, if I take you back to the content
Actually, I
page.
just had a bit of clarification on that one as well. It's saying not just the dream job, it's kind of everything, you know, life in general in the future. How do you get that conversation started?
I will show you one of the activities here that I found quite successful with young people. I've done this in a different context with them, thinking about their skills and their qualities. So if you just say to somebody, what are you good at? They'll probably just turn around and they may say, nothing. I'm not good at anything. I don't like anything. So I've kind of taken a slightly more directive approach to that. So when here we're talking about skills, I've broken down in this resource a significant list of all sorts of different skills. And what we're saying to young people is, okay, let's talk about planning things. So that's a very specific skill. What helps you to plan things effectively? So they may feel that they're no good at planning things. You're not going to just say, oh, I'm no good at that. You're going to say, right, if you had to plan something, what helps you to do it well? So in doing that, we start to build up a picture of what skills they draw on and what they can use. My world of work that you maybe came across last week in the presentation that Skills Development Scotland did is a really useful tool as well in taking, once you've identified with a young person what some of their key skills are, taking those ideas, feeding them into something, and that will come up with suggestions of, right, somebody who's good at the kind of things that you're good at might enjoy these kinds of jobs, and that's then something that you can explore together. This is one of the reasons I think that it's really important to begin this process, like you said, Tracy, a couple of years before somebody leaves school. You don't wait until the week before they're leaving and say, oh, right, we'd better find a job, what do you want to do? You really start well in advance, talking with them in a way that helps them to identify what their skills are, what it is that they have to offer, and to think about how they might help them to do something in the future. I don't know if that answers the question. Do you think, is that helpful?
That's helpful. That's helpful. Yes. I was just in the middle of typing an answer in there, and I was saying I think it's really a matter, isn't it, with your young person, of starting with the basics and taking things in very small steps. It's that bit about not having to do everything all in one go. And the beauty of doing this as a parent is that you can choose the time when your young person is most likely to want to have that conversation, and you can do it like in a five minutes. Don't sit down, as you said, Andrew, you said yourself, over the kitchen table. Don't sit down there and say, right, we're now going to talk about the future. Just do drip feed it over a course of a day, a week, a month, whatever. And as a parent, you gather all of that information and bring it together, but just do it in a conscious way so that you're storing that information in your memory. And that's where I think parents have a bit of an advantage over school planning meetings, because school planning meetings will be tied to a particular day and a particular time. And if that's not a good time for your young person to engage, then it's going to be really difficult to have that conversation. But as a parent, you can do that, and that's the knowledge that you bring. Yeah.
And to give you an idea, the work that I was doing on supported work placements, some of this career planning and identifying skills and qualities is based on the work that I was doing then. Now, I worked with a young person one-to-one in school, going through activities similar to this over about 3 months before we then decided together, based on those conversations, what kind of work placement might be of interest to them in terms of something they'd like to try in the future. What we found, and the feedback we got, was that across the board, whether the young person actually managed to find an appropriate work placement or not, their confidence in what they could offer and their enthusiasm for learning and moving forwards increased. So having these conversations over time in a focused way, but in a way that's relaxed and fun, if you like, can really reap benefits. But yeah, it's a process that needs to take time. It's not something you just sit down and say, right, what are you going to do when you leave school? You need to really, small steps. This resource is one way of doing that, but obviously there may be other ways. I'd better move on from the resource, I think, and just we've touched briefly.
And I just say there's been a question about what about somebody who has profound and multiple learning disabilities and is non-verbal and struggles to communicate. Is a tool like this, can you still use this or elements of this with young people who are in that situation to work out their views?
I would say yes, you could use a tool similar to this. So I worked in one school with a girl who's approaching the end of her school career who was non-verbal. What I did was use these activities, but adapt them slightly myself and come at them from more of a talking mats kind of perspective. So I created images or cards with phrases on that she could place into appropriate places on the mat. If you're familiar with talking mats, that'll mean something to you. If you've not come across talking maths, then I would recommend it is definitely something to look into, because it's a very effective way of helping somebody who's non-verbal to communicate what they want, basically. But this resource itself, I guess that's where you as a parent who knows your young person may well be able to communicate with your young person if they're non-verbal and translate their responses into an appropriate response on screen here. So like I say, it's not designed to sit them down in the corner with a computer and to be told, there you are, do that activity for half an hour. It's a collaborative affair. So communicate with your young person in the way that works best for them, then use this tool as a way of recording what you've discussed. So just a few, and I can see that time has really raced away with us, Tracy. So I'll whiz through the end of what I was wanting to say. A few pointers about either using future me, or they would relate to any conversations with young people, but especially about their skills, their gifts, and how they might want to use them in the future, is when you have these conversations, always make sure you've set a good and a relaxed tone at the start of the conversation. So it's not going to be confrontational. You're not presenting it as, right, we need to have a really difficult talk now. You're sitting down for a pleasant chat together. Ask open questions, so things that aren't going to be just yes, no. So for instance, in this resource, there are questions there about what kind of music do you enjoy? Now, somebody might say, oh, I like rap. Well, a response to that might be, so tell me what it is about rap that you really enjoy. And kind of allows them to start opening up and giving a bit more of themselves. Equally, don't make it just about the young person, but share something of yourself as part of the process as well. Now, you're not going to make it all about you, but by sharing some of your own thoughts, ideas, preferences, likes, dislikes, that can actually, if you open up to the young person you're talking with, whether they're your child or not, simply doing that allows them, gives them permission to do the same. So use active listening when you're talking, reflect back to them what they've said to make sure that you've picked up correctly on what they've said, and to demonstrate to them that, yeah, you really are listening to what they have to say. Good way of doing that is to maybe make what they've said a bit more concise and feed it back to them. But don't interpret what they've said. Use humor. There's nothing, this might be serious, important stuff, but that doesn't mean you can't have a laugh. So the use of humor can help set a relaxed, informal tone that makes the process, makes the conversation enjoyable. Amplify the positives and the possibilities, and again, focus on the ideas of the young person. So you're remaining neutral yourself, but you're helping them to bring any positives to the fore. In this resource in particular, but again with anything, if the young person you're working with is uncomfortable with something that you start to discuss, they don't want to discuss that, well, just move on, don't do it. Be simple, really, yeah. Just if you're getting into territory that the young person's not comfortable with, then it is perfectly okay to leave it behind and to move on. Congratulate them all along the way. They're doing a lot of deep thinking here. And actually, we all like to be told that we've done well. So say to them, well done, affirm them, especially if they've been discussing something or thinking about things that they didn't find easy. And then finally, really important to remember that you do not judge the young person. So if they tell you they want to be an astronaut, you don't tell them that's stupid. You affirm it. Now, you might think it's unrealistic, that they become an astronaut. Although I would refer you back again to the Skills Development Scotland section, where we had a blind chef, we had a deaf choreographer. Anything's possible. But if they are talking about things that you yourself know are beyond the realms of possibility, get into a conversation of, well, what is it about that is attractive to you? And maybe start to think laterally. And that is still then a positive experience. So some very simple practical suggestions at the end of all that. One would be, when you're having these conversations, keep a note of what you've discussed and any decisions that you might have made. Good idea to do something like just use a ring binder to keep all of this information together. And you can use that to keep other transition planning information in as well. When you've got to the end of all of this, and this is one of the things that the Future Me resource does, work together to put together a summary that says, right, we've given this some thought, this is me, this is who I am, this is what I like, this is what I want for my future. And you can use that summary then, or the young person can use that summary to share their hopes and their dreams with the people who are assisting in the planning process. And finally, make sure it's fun. Have a treat. Turn it into a really positive experience whenever you're kind of sitting down and focusing on these things. So last of all, really, was the question of, when do we do this? And the simple answer to that question, now. So it's never too early to start really thinking about these things. It's always good to talk with your young person about what their strengths are, what they're good at, what their hopes are for the future. But certainly within a couple of years of the end of school, ideally. But if your young person's already left school, doesn't matter. Start now. They still have a future ahead of them, and you can still help them to shape that future and to think about what they would like that future to look like for themselves. Now, I was going to whiz into another Mentee activity there, Tracy, but I think we'll skip past that because I can see we've only got 10 minutes until the webinar kind of automatically kicks us all out. So there are my contact details. I'm very happy to respond to anything if anybody wants to get in touch with me personally. And thank you very much for that. Yeah, it's very good to kind of share that experience with you. I'm just looking at how to stop sharing my screen now so that I can hand you back over to Tracy.
I think that's me back. That's fine. No, Andrew, thank you so much for that. I'm just having a look at some of the comments and things that have been made, and it's resonating with me that what I feel and think is not necessarily what my son wants. And I think sometimes, that's one of the things as a parent, it's hardest to kind of keep in your head. You don't do it deliberately, but you think, well, I'm the one who's got, the bigger picture. I can see ahead. And what I think is going to be right for them, it must be what they think, isn't it? And actually taking that time to just row back and say, well, is that really what they want to do? And somebody said, love the animations. It's obviously going to be something that, and I think the fact of having a resource like this that's online as well, so you can go in, and young people as well engage, so many of them engage so much more readily online now than sitting down with a workbook or something like that. So I think it's something that's going to be really useful. Thank you for sharing that with us. That's great. I think I would just add to what Andrew has said, and it's the whole thing around transition planning, really. It's never too early to start, but it's never too late either. I think what you said there was fantastic about whatever stage you're at, there's a future ahead. And that's the one that you need to be focusing on, and sort of starting from where you are, sure. But it doesn't mean that there aren't things that you can do. You can go through a lot of these processes, even when school's not involved, even if social services aren't involved. Just you and your young person building that relationship and getting those conversations going can be really helpful. So we have only got another few minutes. I was going to do something else. I'm not going to do that now. I'm sorry. I realized when I was sharing my screen before, I know you could see the presenter's view. I don't know why that happened. Tech just does that to us sometimes. It's never happened to me before, and hopefully it's not going to happen this time. But I'm sorry if that was a wee bit distracting. But if you just give me a moment, there's one thing, because it's so relevant to what we've been talking about, that I want to share with you if I can. Okay, oh, right, okay. No, I'll just skip through those.
I would just kind of chip in, Tracy, that
Yeah, that's fine, go ahead, Andrew.
The question that, or the comment there about realizing what your young person might want for themselves being different to what you might want for them. A really good skill to try and develop is one of empathy, I think. So recognizing that your young person sees life through their own eyes, not through your eyes. And their life experience is unique to them. And what we all want for our young person, young people, is for them to be happy and fulfilled and content. And so whatever that means for them is really what we want to support them in doing. So try and kind of, if you can, see life from the perspective of your young person and support them in the decisions that they want to make. But basically, be prepared to be there, to be the shoulder that they need if things do go wrong, you know. But we need to learn to make our own mistakes, don't we? And we need to learn from them ourselves. The tough thing as a parent sometimes is being on the sidelines and seeing it happen, but just be prepared to be there and to continue offering the support that they need and deserve.
Thank you. I'm really hoping that you can see my screen now. Andrew, maybe you can tell me, can you see my screen there? Yeah, that's fantastic. All of this is in the handouts, so it's just some resources that might help you. And like I say, whether you're a young person, whatever stage they're at, whatever age they're at, there will be things in these resources that can help you with your planning. So there's the Talking About Tomorrow website. We've mentioned this before as part of these sessions. That's a complete overview of transitions in Scotland, and it gives you loads of useful links to follow up with organisations that can help. And it's got sort of various tools and things that you can download. Not as good as Andrew's, I have to say, because these are paper-based. But you know, there we are. They are still there, and you can download those and use those if that's what suits you best. The Scottish Government has got a whole raft of information around transitions. It doesn't look very engaging. There's a lot of text there, but there's also a lot of information. And when you download the handouts, these links are all live, so you'll be able to click on those and it'll take you through to these sites. There's the Scottish Transitions Forum website. We've got information, we've got videos, we've got guest blogs. There's one, the one at the bottom there, Start Here, a Transitions Diary. This is a diary that a parent of a young person who's going through that final year of school is keeping for us this year, month by month. And person-centered planning is one of the things that she's exploring with her young person. And this is the one that I really wanted to focus on for you, because it's so central to what we've been talking about. You can see on the left there, that's a picture that's like one of the maps pictures that Andrew showed, where it really focuses on the young person, their dreams, their nightmares, their story, and how they've reached where they are. And most schools, most organisations won't actually offer this, but there are some in Scotland that do. They're usually psychologically trained, and they do come at a cost, but there is a person-centered planning grant available. You can apply for that to ILF Scotland. The link is there, ILF Scotland Transition Fund. And if you search on person-centered planning grant, you'll see how you can do that. You can do that as a parent, and they will recommend for you people in your area who can offer this kind of service. And what they will do, they all work in a slightly different way, but they will meet with you, they'll meet with your young person, they'll get the views of other people who are involved who know them really well too, and put something together like this that's really visual, really accessible, and it's something that you can refer to sort of going forward. And it can be a really, really good contribution to the planning process, and especially if your young person perhaps isn't in school anymore, or that has stalled a bit and you want to kickstart it and you want to get them thinking about the future. This can be a fantastic way of doing it. So you can apply for that grant from any stage, from I think it's from age 16 up to 25. So do go and explore that. And they also operate the transition fund, which is a great way of being able to try out new things. And very often, if somebody can't visualize what a job might look like or whatever, then actually trying something out, having the permission, if you like, just to do something that interests them and see where it might lead to them, can be a really helpful thing. And the transition fund is fantastic for that. You can apply for up to £7,500 in any 1 year. You can make repeat applications, and you can do that as well as a parent on your young person's behalf. Or actually, it's meant to be the young person who puts that forward, but you can support them to make that application. They don't need to have a school involved or a social worker or anything like that. The families can do that directly. So I would definitely recommend exploring that if it's something that you think your young person would benefit from, and especially if they've left school and they're currently sitting at home and not doing anything very much. And you're not quite sure how to get that moving, then thinking of something that the transition fund could help fund. They can also pay for maybe personal assistance or something like that to help people with travel training, that kind of thing. Go onto that website and have a look. I would definitely recommend that. So I think we're probably nearly out of time. I just want to ask if there's any other last minute questions that people might want to put to Andrew or myself on this. We can always come back to it later on and do another webinar on this subject at some point in the future, if that would be helpful. But just Andrew, yeah.
Yeah, an additional thing, Tracy, that I would just want to chip in about the question of what if my young person just says they're not good at anything and doesn't have any ideas, is the person-centered planning methodology, and to some extent the Future Me resource there, also draws on what other people have to say about the young person. So there's an affirming element to that, where they might not see themselves as being particularly gifted, but there's the opportunity for people who know them to kind of share what they see the young person having to offer, and that can be a really valuable part of the experience and exercise, I think.
Yeah, I think that's certainly well worth saying, and that's part of building up confidence as well, and making young people feel supported, and there are people on their side. It's not just the family; there are other people as well. So, and certainly for person-centered planning, as you say, usually what they would do is ask the young person themselves who they would like to be involved. Who do they trust? Who would they like to be having those conversations with? That's a central part of it. Okay, I think it's probably time to wind up then. So next week we're looking at getting the right support, and part of that, Andrew has said, as parents, we are in the best place very often to know our children inside out, know our young people and what makes them tick. But how do we actually communicate that with the people who are supporting them to make sure that they understand our young people a little bit more closely to how we understand them as well, and are better placed to support them and meet their needs? So that's what we'll be talking about next week, and we've got somebody from PAMIS coming to discuss that with us. So I hope you'll be able to join us. When I end the webinar here, there will be a survey, and I would really appreciate it if you could just take a moment. It will only take about a minute, just to give us some feedback on the webinar this morning, because it really does help us in planning for the future and in making sure that we're actually coming up with things that really are meeting a need, because if not, we need to be looking at that and doing something a little bit differently. So if we can get your feedback for that, that would be really welcome. Thank you. So thanks very much again for your time. It's been lovely to have you with us, and enjoy the rest of your day. I hope you found this useful. Bye.
Bye-bye.